At the end of the conference here, we will be doing an ecology, and Mimi will be sharing an ecology with all of us. I do have the Western, but if there is someone from South and Central that would have, we'll ask for names before as well, but I do have two from Western for you that bring it up. So. Okay, I think we're all ready. I do have to share one thing with you here. All that talk about ice cream yesterday, I was just amazed at it. So when I got up this morning, guess who I met in the hallway? I met Susie, Suzanne, and guess what t-shirt she had on? She told me she was going out jogging, but she had this beautiful ice cream t-shirt on. And I said, oh, look at that t-shirt. Oh, here she comes.
No, you just have to see. I'm not the only one who's advertising my ice cream.
Oh, there's the chocolate mousse ice cream. Or
I really think you should consider going somewhere close to the chocolate mousse next year.
chocolate mousse next year. That's what we're still working on. That's right.
First Congregational Church of the Moose.
First Congregational Church of the Moose, and it has to be extreme moose tracks.
Yes.
And so, yes, that's how it is. But Suzanne had this great t-shirt on advertising ice cream as she's jogging in the dark. I give her a lot of credit. So, you guys are tired of hearing me. Dave is already going cut. Someone mute him. So, I will go ahead and turn the mic over to our guest speaker. Steve, come on up and begin our day.
I asked for a microphone that I could wear because I use my hands when I talk. It might also help you hear because I think probably last night I was moving the microphone around while I talk. I use my hands. A number of years ago, I went to a livestock auction with a parishioner from the congregation, and he said, "Hey, I don't know how to tell you this, but I think you just bought a pig." Because I was talking to him like this. I did buy a pig, but I think I might have bid on one. I'm glad I didn't have to pay for one. I'd like to start off this morning by talking about, just real quickly, we're talking building community, but the two mandates that we have as pastors and leaders of our congregations. These are mandates that not only I think we have as a call from God as we are shepherding congregations, but also they're mandates that the congregation is calling for from us. And the first is to love the church as we are. This will help. So now you don't just hear me breathe, you can hear me talk. No one in congregations wants a leader, a pastor, who has disdain for who they are or what they represent in the present time. They want to be loved. We, as congregations, want to be an expression of God's love together for who we are. But there's also that reality that we're not always complete and whole, and not everything is always good in our experiences together. And so there's also the mandate of leading into hope, finding ways in which we can guide a congregation from the way it is now to the way God wants it to be. So those are our two mandates. And I put it on here as a Venn diagram because really I think the primary work for us in community is in that area that overlaps. Because we're doing both of these things. We need to hold both of these things. And so we need to find ways to be present and hold the congregation where they are in love and care, but also to extend out and to lead into a future that has promise. So that's our challenge. That's where we begin with this. And so this all has to do with community and what it means to be a part of community. And I'm going to use now a set of principles that I've learned from Peter Block. Peter Block is a consultant and an author, and he has done a lot of work with community. And community, in his definition, would be from a civic organization, from a neighborhood association, all the way to a school or to a church or any other gathering of people for a particular purpose. Now, he has a book that's called Community, The Structure of Belonging. And I'm borrowing these principles from him with the recognition that I'm making them my own. I find them to be very powerful, and so as I am working with these within the context of congregations, they are taking on some new life within the work that I do. The first one of these is invitations. Oh, I wanted to just tell a quick story before I do this. There is a congregation that I spent some time with this year that as the year 2019 was coming to an end, Community Church was really struggling. Their attendance was falling off. There were only 2 young families in the congregation, and they were very sporadically involved. Their pastor, whose name was Tom, was being criticized a lot from the congregation because they were uncertain of what they were doing or what their future was. And so within the congregation, there was a sense of tribalism, of national politics, because 2019 was also a national election year that was kind of ugly for those of us who had any awareness of what was going on. The tweeting and the face boxing was going on not only outside the congregation, but people within the congregation were also getting involved in that. And the marks of division were growing in that congregation. And then COVID-19 shut everything down. The church literally stopped. It didn't do anything for a while. And the only thing that kept happening within that congregation was a widening distance between people. They were a little slow to figure out Zoom and Facebook Live, but then they finally got back together virtually. And then in the summer of 2020, they began to have in-person worship outside. The congregation of 200 now is about 20. In September of that year, those 20 people returned to the sanctuary for in-person worship, but with restrictions. Now, through this whole experience of their decline and that pandemic and the division, dozens of people left the congregation. Under incredible pressure, Pastor Tom resigned. People divided into teams and began the war for power in the congregation. The church council meetings devolved into monthly verbal assaults. And I'm not joking about that. When my first church council meeting there, someone told someone else to get the hell out in the council meeting. The community of Community Church was wrecked. So, how do we love the church as it is and lead the church into hope? Now, there are no prepackaged solutions to this. There are no easy fixes or programs that can make it all happen. So, what can we do? So, let's begin with these marks of community, values of community, shifts in many ways of community. We're going to start with invitation. Now, invitation as a value for community is different than obligation. It replaces obligation. In our culture, in our congregations, we have too often peddled obligations. We've too often coerced people into feeling like they need to be a part of everything. And that they've got to do this or they've got to do that in order to be a full part of the whole. If we start with invitation rather than obligations or oughts or shoulds, what it looks like is we are offering hospitality. We are inviting people into the hospitality of the congregation. We are calling all to join in a contrast community working toward an alternative future. In other words, we're not just going to go about business as usual. We want to invite everyone to come in and see that there's a difference in what we're doing, and it's going to have a different outcome. We're moving to a different kind of future. This has to do with our invitation of strangers, people we don't know, to come and be a part. It also has to do with our invitation within the congregation, our invitation of each other to come into the circle and to join in the creation of what is happening in the church. This invitation also has to do with being clear about what it means to join in. So it's not just, hey, this is all a happy land of lollipops, come on in. It's, we have this task and this opportunity and this thing that we can do together, and these are the commitments we make as we come together. Please join us. It also means being open to no's. I have a hard time with this one because as a pastor for many years, it was so hard to hear somebody say, no, I'm not going to do that. And I really thought everybody had to do it. You know, I'm excited about this. Everyone else should be too. But we have to, if we're going to be open-handed about our invitation, we also have to be open to hear the no's. Paul Hebert, who is an anthropologist, he talks quite a bit about bounded and center sets, bounded sets and center sets. And let me give a quick explanation of this because I think this has everything to do with invitation. Within a bounded set of people, within a community, what you're doing is you're creating boundaries and saying everyone that's a part of us is within this boundary. And that boundary then becomes the way in which we're held together. We know what we believe. We know where we're going. We know who's in and who's out. And then Hebert says that's one way of doing community, doing a group. Another way is a centered set. And a centered set is where you have centered principles or understandings, or I would like to suggest that within the church we have Jesus, who is our center, and we are drawn into that center. And so rather than having these concentric circles of how close we are to the center, we have this movement toward the value or the belonging participation in Christ. That's a very different kind of invitation. When we are inviting people just to get more involved, we are really peddling obligation. But if we are inviting people to come on along and experience and see the difference that Christ is making in our life together, it changes everything. Invitation. The second value is possibilities. One of the things I hear a lot when I first start conversations with a particular church is, here are our problems. What can you do to help us fix them? And that is a very natural thing to ask. We want solutions for the problems that we have. However, if we come at everything from a toolbox of fixing, I think we will miss the opportunities that God really wants us to take hold of and to see, because they are not in our field of vision. And we sometimes are trying to fix problems that are very deep cultural issues that we're dealing with simple fixes, with Band-Aids. So if we start with inviting the congregation to consider the possibilities of what could be, rather than trying to fix things and do solutions, we're in a very different kind of place. I had one experience in a congregational meeting where someone said to me, Steve, you've been working with us now for 6 months. What difference is it making? And I kind of stammered around a little bit like, I was hoping they would know that. And I said, well, in what way? What are you thinking? And he said, well, I guess I want to know, what are your deliverables? Okay, let's be clear about this. My deliverables. When we talk about outcomes and deliverables and solutions, we're still fixing problems. But if we can begin to talk about what might God be doing among us, what would we like it to be like? Rather than, oh, here's this problem, how do we fix it? What would be the ideal situation for us? And how could we imagine that being, how could we imagine that going for us? A possibility creates something new. It doesn't revive something that used to be. And I think this is a very important point for us. It creates something new. It keeps us from getting stuck. In fact, in this congregation community church that was completely broken, when I first started talking with them, everyone wanted to talk about what went wrong. And I said, we've got to stop this, because we're not going to fix it. We're not going to be able to go back into what went wrong, and everybody's going to agree, oh, that's the thing that happened, and so let's just turn that around and call it good. There were so many things that happened, and the blame was being thrown around so much there, we would have never figured it out. But if we start with looking at what God might want for us, how it could be in the future, then we don't have to try to figure out the past and solve the past. Our hopeful future begins with a declaration of the possibility we stand for. All right, third of these values is commitment. Now, commitment is not transaction. Commitment is a promise made with no expectation of return. I think, again, here, many of our congregations have struggled with the let's make a deal kind of thing, where, would you be willing to fill this role? We had to meet a Sunday school teacher for the sixth graders. Oh, I could do that, but if I do that, then I can't do this, or I'm not willing to. Or if somebody else would do this over here, then I'm willing to do that over. That's really not commitment. That's trading. That's a bargain, and a bargain future is no future. If we can, yeah.
Can you say that again? A commitment is not this.
A commitment is not making a deal, is not trading off. Commitment is making a promise for what I will be a part of. Commitment has a lot to do with ownership. That when we begin to grab a hold and commit to what it is that God is doing among us and with us together, then we are also taking some ownership for it. And it's a lot harder to blame someone else for something that I own. In community church, one person came to me and they said, you know what, it seems like all of us played a role in this drama. And I said, oh, yeah, what do you mean? And they said, well, it occurred to me that I didn't do anything. And I was thinking it wasn't my fight. And I was just standing by and watching it happen. That was a role in the drama, they said. My standing by and watching it happen was just as bad as if I was in the mix causing the trouble. Yeah, they took ownership. They could have said, it's not my problem. But they said, no, I own this too. I'm committed to this too. So commitment is about ownership. It's about making the promise. to be engaged without trading off. And commitment, again, let's go back to this, if we get a no during the invitation, you invite people to be involved and they say no. The interesting thing is that no is the beginning of commitment. The problem is when nobody answers. You know, when you make the invitation, you get no response. That's where the real problem is. But if you have somebody that says, nope, I can't do that, or I'm not going to do that right now, they just made a commitment. But they're not going to do it. That's a beginning point. And that takes us to the next value.
Just one clarification again, that first statement you made about commitment, a promise made with no expectation of what was that again, Steve?
Of return.
Of return, that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, and this is a really, going back to that, it's a really hard concept for us because we live in a commercial society where we make payments on everything because we're going to get something back out of it. And really in community, we are engaging in a way that we're not expecting that everything we do is going to have a return to us, that we're going to benefit from each thing that we do. We're committing because we're committed. Because this is a promise we're making to be a part of this community. Dissent. I think one of the biggest casualties of the last number of years of our political environment in the United States has been tribalism, backing away from each other when there is a disagreement expressed. Polarities, parties, ideologies that build up walls, that create tribes, that make us name teams and go against each other. This is happening in our everyday interactions with people in our neighborhoods. It's happening in our churches. It's happening in our families. One of the issues is, I believe, we've stopped listening to dissent. We've stopped listening when somebody says, I don't see it that way. We've stopped listening when somebody says, I think this, and we think something else. So instead of backing away when dissent is expressed, a value of community is leaning in and listening and understanding and asking questions and wanting to know more about the differences in our understandings, our disagreements. And in a sense, it's a way of affirming the person without having to affirm what they have to say, because I'm listening to that person, what they're important to me. I'm leaning into them. They are important to me. So dissent, listening to dissent, is extremely important to community building. If we don't do this, what we're going to end up seeing, I believe, in the next few decades, our congregations are going to become so ideologically homogenous that we're inbred and sick if we exist at all. People will go where they feel like, well, I can identify with these people here. I'll go there. And then when the next issue comes around, they're going to say, oh, I don't identify with these people at all. I identify over here. And in the long shot, I think a lot of people will just drop out altogether, and our churches will become very anemic. So we must lean in to our dissent, our disagreements, our differences. That sounded a lot like a sermon. I'm sorry. Okay. And then the fifth and final of these values is gifts. Focus on gifts rather than deficiencies. Last week, I got a phone call from the chair of the nurture committee at the church that I am helping with. And she said, I really need to talk with you because we're starting a new church here and we don't know what to do because we have a couple of children showing up for Sunday school. And what do we do? How do we plan? Where do we go with this? And she went through this long litany of the problems. We don't have enough children. We've struggled to find Sunday school teachers. Our Sunday mornings aren't the same as they used to be. Our families are more involved in soccer on Sunday mornings than they are in Christian education. And she just had this long litany of the problems that they were facing. She said, would you please come and meet with us? We're meeting this week. Would you come and join us for our nurture commission meeting? And I said, sure. I was blown away when the door opened up and people began streaming in that were a part of this nurture committee. There were 12 people on the nurture committee. I thought there would be 2 or 3 because they were having a hard time finding people. There were 12 people. What an incredible thing. And then they began talking about, well, we need to do our annual student blessing, where they have all the students, they recognize every student that's in the congregation, from kindergarten all the way through college. They name each name, and then they pray a blessing over all those students. They had over 25 names on their list. Now, it's not a big number, but that's not the 2 or 3 that they were concerned about showing up on Sunday morning. As we sat there, I suggested, you know what, if you're worried about what isn't here, take a look at what is. You got 12 people in the circle that are passionate about nurturing your children. You've got 25 children that you're recognizing and blessing who are moving on to school. And as they thought about that, they began to shift in their thinking. They finally decided what they're going to do is they're going to do virtual Sunday school. They're going to do virtual school because they're not going to do it on Sundays. They're going to do it whenever they can. They're going to gather kids and do it with Zoom. And there was one teacher who said, my students are going to be a little too young to do this online with. I'm going to go visit them. I'm going to go around to the homes and spend some time with them. And every week, these teachers agreed that they're going to send out the Sunday school lesson, and then they're going to call them, or they're going to go on virtually, or they're going to visit them at their home. They're going to continue doing their nurture and continue developing these young Christians in the faith, but they're just not going to do it on a Sunday morning in the way that they always have. They came to terms with the gifts that they actually had, the opportunities and capacities that they had. We have an attraction to problems, deficiencies, inabilities, and needs. They're the things we're afraid of, but they're also the things that captivate our attention. Who isn't here this Sunday morning? And we look around in the sanctuary and we see, oh my, there are 50 seats that are empty. The sanctuary seats 100. You see how we are attracted to what isn't there? Yeah. Connecting with our story last night and the people in Egypt, before they made their trek into the wilderness, one of my favorite conversations with Walter Brueggemann is about Pharaoh and Pharaoh's economy of scarcity. He talks about how Pharaoh created wealth and abundance for himself and the elite of Egypt on the backs of the slaves and everyday people. And how when he wanted more bricks to build more buildings, to store more things, he demanded more bricks. And when the slaves, the Israelite slaves came and said, we just can't do this, he he said, okay, not only are you going to make more bricks, but you're going to come up with your own straw to do it. That's an economy of scarcity. And Brueggemann suggests that every time that we in the church begin to move toward what isn't here and what God hasn't given us, we are going back to Pharaoh's economy of scarcity. Rather than when the people moved into the wilderness and God began to provide for them. It may not have been what they wanted God to provide, but God was providing. In the story of the manna, there's a parallel that in the mornings they gathered manna, at night God provided quail. Right? And if you read the full text, you find out God provided quail 3 feet deep for a day's journey any side of their camp. There was quail for them. That's abundance. It may not have been their choice of food, but it was incredible. So, leaders, let me offer you a couple of tips here. Instead of telling people in your congregations what they need to improve on, instead of telling them what didn't go well, and instead of trying to tell them how it's going to be done next time, I would suggest that you confront them with their gifts. That you say, you have these gifts here. Or maybe you even want to be very specific and say to individual people, you have this incredible gift that you bring here. Right? If we can name the gifts that we've received from each other within the community, within the congregation, we are moving more into embracing the abundance that God has provided. If we can name the capacities that we have as communities of faith to be God's people, we're moving away from that economy of scarcity. I think it's a fun exercise to simply stop occasionally in official meetings and say, okay, let's name the gifts. Because, especially right now, when we're in a time when it's easy to notice what isn't there, let's name what is here. Maybe you ask the question, what did you experience in the last 10 minutes that made a difference in your life? Name it. Or, what gift have you received from another person in this room today? Suzanne and I were sitting in the back during your business meeting, and I leaned over and I said, these people are hilarious. You have a sense of humor that is awesome. That's a gift. That's a gift. You should recognize that and more. Practice recognizing the gifts in your congregations. Let it be awkward. Ask the question, what gifts would you like to recognize in somebody else? And sit in that awkward silence for a little bit. Practice that, because eventually it won't be awkward anymore. You'll get it. People will get it. And when you tell somebody, if I say, Charles, I want to thank you for this gift that you gave me today, and I name what that is, our tendency as people is to say, oh, it was nothing. Or, well, I don't know if I really did that much. Stop it right there and say, all you have to do is say thank you. Here's the gift I've received from you. All you have to do is say thank you. Pass that around. Share that. So if we go back to the whole list here, let me put these all out here. Invitation, possibilities, commitment, dissent, and gifts. That's the full list that I have here. Peter Block actually puts ownership as another one of these. So he names invitation, and then he has 5 more that include ownership. I stick ownership in with commitment because I see them going so closely together. But I don't know that it has to be one way or the other. And I'm sure that there are other values of what it means to be in community. But these are 5 that I have found really valuable building blocks for community. if we can embrace these, they can begin to make that shift for the congregation toward, just loving us as we are, or the hopeful future. I think this brings them both together. This isn't denying either side of that mandate that we have to love the congregation as they are and to lead into a hopeful future. So I'd like to invite some conversation right now, and I'm going to start by inviting you to turn to one or two other people. So on Zoom, maybe you can do this as a group together, and choose one of these 5 values that are named on the screen here, and then just say, what struck me, what struck you as you heard these spoken about this morning? So take 5 minutes. What struck you? You don't have to say a whole lot, just name one thing. What struck you about these values? If you choose one to talk about, great. If you want to name a couple of things, that's fine. All right? Take 5 minutes. similar question, but it's a little bit different, and it's just open for all of our response together. I would like to hear how important you think these values are for your congregation right now. And I don't just mean, oh yeah, important or not. Say something about, do you find these things to be important for where you are as congregations at this point in time?
I do. And the one that we were talking about in particular was dissent. We have differences of opinions that go from here to here
Yeah.
on things at our church. I'm a deacon. And we've got people who are here, and we've got people who are here. And trying to bring them together into the middle to come up with workable solutions has been very difficult. There are some things that we would like that require a large outlay of cash. Oh, we can't spend that money, we just no, we can't do that. But it's an investment in the future of the church. You know, can we come up with $200 a year per student for the lay ministry students? Oh my goodness, you have to put that as a line item in the budget. And it's like, no, it's not that big of a deal. We have the money's there. Oh, we don't want to spend the money. Rainy day. This is about as rainy as it gets.
Yeah.
And, my whole take on this is that when there is dissent, the biggest part of the problem is people not truly listening to each other.
Yes.
I think if you do, one of the things is you realize you're not really as far apart as it seems.
Yeah.
Okay?
That's right.
You don't have to come to a complete agreement that you can say, well, I agree with you on A, B, and C, but not D, E, and F. And the other person says, well, come on, no. Let's see how we can put together what you see and what I see and bring it together into one cohesive whole that will work for the church as a whole and will be of benefit in the long run.
Yeah.
And so I think that dissent is one of the most difficult things that we have to deal with,
Yeah.
but it's a necessary thing, and we need to find a way to truly listen to people's thoughts, fears, concerns, interests, ideas, and figure out what is in the best interest of the church as a whole, keeping in mind at all times that we are here to glorify God.
Right.
To bring people, draw them in closer to God, take them deeper on their faith journey in life, and do it in a warm, loving, accepting way.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
have to send
Oh,
this.
thank you so much for that. So just to offer a couple of comments to pull that together, but dissent is a very important part of what it means to be the church, I believe. And that reality that we struggle sometimes to listen, to actually hear each other. I've done an exercise a couple times with congregations that were divided on issues where bring people together and say, what are your disagreements? And we can list them on a piece of paper, and make long lists sometimes of here are all the things we disagree about. And then say, okay, now we're going to break up into groups of 4 or 5, and you're going to pick one of these disagreements to share your opinion on. And we do that. So the groups break up and they go around the circle, and they're very politely, they share their view on that particular issue. We make sure that nobody's interrupting them. And then we say, okay, round 2, you're going to share the other perspective on that issue. And each person has to go around and say, this is what the other perspective is on this issue. And just an exercise in learning to listen to each other.
Well, that's it. And Elaine brought up a very valid point, I thought. She said so many times when we are in these conflicts, we engaged in listening and absorbing what they're saying, we're forming our rebuttal
Yeah,
already in our mind while they're still talking.
that's right. That's right. Yeah. In some conversation groups I've done, I've said, okay, you gotta give at least 5 seconds after one person speaks before the next person can speak.
And tables are dropped.
Do you think that the issue that I'm hearing in today's culture, especially in the United States, is that when dealing with dissent in the churches and in communities and in our nation, that there has to be, it's ingrained in us that there has to be a winner and there has to be a loser. And if you lose, well, as we saw, if you lose, you actively oppose that losing and saying, no, I won anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that, and then
I
also,
think you're right.
and also, when listening, because of social media and because of the vastness of technology, I think it's even more difficult for us to sit down and listen, and not just say, you know what, I don't want to have this conversation. I'm gonna go now. I'm gonna take my ball and go. I'm gonna go find another game to play.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
So I guess my question then would be, how would you engage a congregation that, two things, how do you engage a conversation that there's two sides, and one is this feeling that one has to win and one has to lose? And second, what do you do with a congregation that you're saying, okay, let's have a meeting, let's meet, let's talk, let's share, let's do these exercises, and they say, no, we don't want to do that. We'll just go. We'll go plant a church somewhere else.
Sure. Which is the standard way that this is happening in our culture, right? I mean, if we feel like everyone here thinks a different way than I do, then I better go find a group that
I'll start another political party.
Right. I might join it. There was a sociological study done of media, mass media, for this last year around whenever politics was mentioned. And what the researchers did was they cataloged words that were positive and negative. And so they said, whenever these positive words show up, we're going to count them. Whenever these negative words show up, we're going to count them. And then we're going to see, does this news report come out in a more positive or negative light on this particular political issue? They included everything from Fox News to NPR in this. 7 to 1, all the news articles about politics this last year were negative. 7 to 1. And their conclusion was because that's what the media believes people want. They want to be opposed. They want that opposition. God save us from that coming into the church. But it is coming into the church, right? Yes. So, just I think that again, this is the sermon, but if we can find a way to lean in as a community of faith, if we can find a way to lean into each other and listen when we have disagreements, it's going to be a different kind of experience for us than if we're always opposed. Yeah.
So I have two thoughts. One is, instead of let's have a meeting, what about let's have a meal?
Sure.
You know, that when you sit down and breaking bread together is holy, right? We believe that at the heart of all of this. And so to sit down and begin to share in that way creates a point of commonality. The other thing that I was going to say before Justin got me thinking about that was thinking back to the story in the wilderness. You mentioned the quail. The other interesting thing is the manna came every day.
Every day.
And you could not hoard it. You You got that gift and you had to use that gift, and if you didn't use it and you tried to stow it up and put it away, it rotted. It got nasty and bad and nourished nothing.
Right.
And I think that narrative of insufficiency that we're talking about in our little group is one we all fall into real easily, but I think that we need to remember the manna.
Yeah.
I like your suggestion about the meal. I'm carried a step further saying, do it as a potluck, because then if you are going to be there and you are responsible for preparing food for someone else to nourish their bodies as well as your own, it invests you even a little bit further in the process.
Yes, the symbolism there is rich. Yeah, good. Thank you. Yes.
Well, near to the heart of Congregationalism is the idea, the concept of covenant. And our covenant is that we are committed to one another, to love one another, and to work with one another. And dissent can take place within that covenant, just as it can in a covenant of marriage. What happens in marriage when dissent is taken out of the context of the covenant, it ends in divorce. And that often happens in the context of the church as well, and shouldn't, because we need to be reminded we have covenanted to love one another and to work with one another, and any dissent we have, or disagreement, which just words here, but has to happen within that context of covenant. And that's at the heart of our, and most of us would say, well, we come from a non-creedal tradition, so we are covenant-based, not creed-based, so that dissent has to happen within that context.
Yes.
Where whatever else happens, we will stick together.
Right.
And that's really
Right.
hard. I think it's really hard when
Marriage is hard.
you have, I always said that marriage, parenthood, and faith are not for the faint of heart. They are difficult, but I find within the church context that when you have somebody who dissents, who becomes really unhappy with what's going on, all of a sudden you don't see them in the church anymore. And it's like a divorce. It's like ripping the fabric of a family apart, because all of a sudden you're losing a part of who you are.
Yeah.
And you didn't have a chance to set things right. And how do we figure out how to do that so we don't lose people?
Right. You're asking a rhetorical question, I hope.
Well, no, yes and no. I would take any suggestions if you would have.
Well, okay, my primary suggestion to you, I'm looking out here and I'm guessing I'm looking at pastors and leaders in churches.
Yeah.
May it start with you. If you can work at invitation and possibilities and commitment and dissent and gifts within leadership in the congregation, you can begin to spill this out into the experiences within the congregation. I think that gives you some hope for how the congregation will embrace it.
Steve, I really love the way you put this up here. I look at this as, you mentioned that these are building blocks. And if you take the narrative that you're providing to us, and we use those rather than the stumbling blocks that the world provides for everyone to look at, we change the entire way we come together as a church. And I really think this
Oh, thank you. That's well said. What I can imagine is that congregations that grab a hold of this kind of community building are the kind of congregations that people will look at and say, ooh, I want to be a part of that. That's different. I don't see that anywhere else. How do I get involved? Yeah. Our time is up. Thank you so much for the interaction around this.